When did you first grow curious about the paranormal? Dare you dig deeper? You are listening to House of Asher.
Hey everybody, welcome back to this new episode of House of Asher. This is, I believe, 108, if memory serves me correctly, and you are probably listening to me on either YouTube, let me see, iHearts, iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, and the Big Mama, Paranormal UK Radio, that takes us around the globe to every little house, hut, and I don't know. I don't know if they have radio in caves or if they have radio in I don't know. Maybe in the deep heart of the jungle. I don't know. Anyway, it'd be cool to find out. If so, contact me back. And you can contact me through steveeasher.com. That is sort of my main page. You can also find me on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, all those little, talky-walky, back-and-forth little guys. And anyway, I'm excited, man. I'm just, we're going to get into some stuff that's pretty groovy. And I've always dug, kind of wooded areas and strange animals and creatures and legends and all that stuff, man. I just eat that up. And the guy we're going to have on here in just a few is a guy who lives that. I can kind of live vicariously through what he does. And so it's really cool that 5-year-old me who wants to look for dinosaur bones and slee stacks in caves and all these weird mysteries and things like that. This guy does. And what I'm gonna do a real quick little kind of intro, little bio for him. So forgive me if I stumble across this. For decades, Scott Wolter has honed his skills in the sciences, looking for historical answers within the natural world. Now, he continues his quest for the truth on Travel Channel in the new season of America Unearthed. In the 10-episode, 1-hour series, Wolter explores some of America's deepest secrets, digging up mysteries that have been hidden until now. Using his background as a forensic geologist and teaming up with eyewitnesses and other experts in their respective fields, Wolter is determined to find new evidence and ultimately the proof that has been buried in time, suggesting history is not what we have been told. And we will be having Scott on very, very soon. But I do want to make sure to remind everybody, you can still get my books, from StevieAsher.com. That's everything from the hauntings of the Kentucky State Penitentiary all the way up through the Great Mud Flood. They're all available there for you to buy. And as always, please leave a comment at the end of the show here. I would love to hear from you. I love critiques. And anything that can make the show better, I'm always 110% behind. So what we're going to do is we are getting ready to have the man, the myth, the legend, Scott Wolter, with us in one moment. Hey, Scott, welcome to the show. I appreciate you coming on.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited. It's episode 5 night.
Yeah, I'm telling you, man. It's I've been checking out the series. As I told you before, I'm a fan from the start of it and stuff. And as I did kind of a little intro for you, and I explained to everybody, I kind of live vicariously through what you do. I think so many people, it's like people have fantasy football, and I have stuff like this.
Well, good for you. It's a good healthy hobby. It sounds like.
Oh, absolutely. And that's the thing is, that's what's so great about the Travel Channel. Give them a little shameless plug. They've got so many different shows on there that touch on so many different things. You have a lot of channels where it's more or less the same spiel, but each of the new shows and even your new episodes are all really different, and that's what I really love about it. Which I'm not going to try to keep you real long because I know obviously you've got some stuff going on tonight, but let's get into it, man. What I want to know first, I always ask everybody their origin story. I was a big comic book kid, and what made little Scotty want to go off into creep around in caves and look up bones and all this? What happened, or what went wrong, or what went right?
Well, I've always been, I've always been a curious kid, and I loved to play outside when I was little, and I was always into sports, and I went to college on a football scholarship, and basically majored in eligibility my first year there. But in the spring of my freshman year of college, I took an intro to geology course, and I had this wonderful professor. His name was Charlie Match, and he was just amazing. And the thing I liked about geology is it's so logical. Everything fit together beautifully, and this is how these things formed, and these kind of rocks here will have these properties. And I just took to it. And I'll never forget, at the end of the course, and I got an A in the course, and towards the end of the course, Charlie asked me to come into his office, and he knew I was a football player and really didn't know what the heck I wanted to do with my life at the time. And he looked at me and he said, you kind of have a talent for this geology thing, but I don't know if you can do it. The old negative sell, right?
Right.
And so I looked at him and I said, well, that's fine, And then, we talked a little bit, and then before I left his office, I said, well, if I was interested in pursuing geology, what should I do next? And he said, well, I'm teaching a 3,000 geomorphology class next quarter. You might want to consider that. And I said, well, I'll think about it. And I walked out, and then I sprinted down, and I signed up for that class. And that was it. And I remember at the end of that class, I went up to Charlie and said, hey, I'd like to have a meeting with you. And he kind of laughed, and, it was all a game, but we were having fun with it. And then I went into his office, and I said, I kind of like this geology thing, but I'll only pursue it on one condition. And he said, oh, what's that? And I said, if you would be my advisor. And he said, yes, and that was it. So I always thank, Charlie for inspiring me to get into geology, and he passed away a few years ago, but we were lifelong friends, and if I didn't have him as the wonderful mentor that I did, I don't know what I'd be doing.
And that's what's so interesting, which, you're a very nuts and bolts guy, and I mean it as a compliment.
No, I appreciate that.
Well, it's just sometimes you can get a little, I call it a little foo-foo, a little out there, and you know how it is.
A little woo-woo?
Little woo-woo, yeah. And this is coming from a guy who writes stories like folklore and stories about local ghost stories and stuff. But I don't say those are ghosts. I don't know what those are. I don't have the proof. But in a lot of the shows that you have done, you've gathered proof, and you've put some things to bed, and then you've also opened up other questions, which I find is great.
Well, yeah. The thing is that we try to keep these investigations grounded in science at the end of the day. And even some of the, things that really many people would say, well, why are you looking at Jack the Ripper, and why are you looking at alien artifacts and all that? And I said, well, yes, I realize that's not my primary focus, but at the same time, the scientific method is used in every discipline. It doesn't matter what it is you're pursuing. The process of investigation is the same. And, facts, even ghost hunting or paranormal. There's scientific ways of trying to answer questions, and it's about gathering evidence and trying to find enough evidence that you interpret correctly to hopefully draw a definitive conclusion. That doesn't always happen, but the process of investigation never changes. Doesn't matter what the subject matter is.
Right. Well, my course of study was criminal justice. So you would want to do a thing, obviously, like you're mapping out, you're gridding out. It doesn't matter if it's a crime scene, a disappearance, or like you said, some sort of alien landing or ghost. You're going to grid stuff out. You're going to take it and do everything step by step. And like you said, you're going to have to use a scientific method, because otherwise, like you said, it's just going to be, smoke and mirrors, and it's going to be hard to be taken seriously.
Well, exactly, and it's kind of interesting. There are a lot of people that don't necessarily like the show for whatever reason, and I say, look, if you don't like the show or you don't like me, that's fine. I mean, I'm not everybody's cup of tea, and the show isn't everybody's cup of tea. But if it's something else, I always say, look, if you want to have a discussion, I'm happy to talk with you about it. So tell me specifically what it is that you don't like about the conclusion we drew, or the facts that we generated, or if you disagree, what facts do you have to counter it? And you know what? When I approach people like that can be a little on the negative side, it's usually a very short conversation. And like I said, if it's just a matter of it's not your cup of tea, that's fine. Go your own way, and no harm, no foul. It's all good.
Right. Well, and that's where you can generally see when a person is earnest in trying to go at it. Well, I mean, and don't get me wrong. A lot of shows are entertainment. It's there to kind of entertain, and maybe if you can get some learning in the middle of it too, that's great. But a lot of stuff is very scripted, and so you kind of have to look at it like this is not a dissertation. You are not in the middle of a college learning from the source. And this is a lot of people and it is entertainment, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Well, there's elements of entertainment, but at the end of the day, it's grounded in a proper investigation, and I think you can marry the two, but just never lose sight of the fact that it has to be a legitimate investigation. Otherwise, it's fantasy, and I think that's important.
Right. Well, we were talking about, like, before there was the Cave of Secrets, alien artifacts, Phoenicians in America, the Ripper Unmasked, and now the new one, Bigfoot of the Bayou.
Well, tonight is actually the Phoenicians in America that I'm going to be watching. I'm not, people that stream the show can get, the episodes a week early. But if you want to talk about the Honey Island Swamp Monster, which, quite frankly, when I first heard about, when this was first presented to me, I kind of went, what the heck is this Honey Island Swamp Monster? But I'll tell you what, when I got into it, this is a really, really interesting episode. You're going to see some amazing footage, old footage, and you're also going to see me do some pretty cool things, and we're going to bring science to the discussion. But at the same time, we're also going to have fun. I think people are going to enjoy that episode, and there's some real twists and turns, and I actually, going into that episode, I was a little bit skeptical, but it ended up being one of my favorite episodes.
Well, without getting, I don't want to spill the beans on too much stuff of it, but, there were different things that I know in regards of, be it Bigfoot or skunk apes or whatever you want to call them, because we have an area called Land Between the Lakes, which is not 15 miles from me, and it's got tons of old stories about things like that, and almost like dogmen, all kinds of weird, like hybrid type sightings of creatures. And we'd even unfortunately a family that had died under really strange circumstances, and one of the victims was like taken up about 60 feet in a tree. And
oh my gosh!
Oh yeah, it's extremely gnarly, and the fact that it was rooted in such a horrible loss, you obviously have to take things in a certain amount of reverence out of respect for the people. But one of the things that...
Absolutely.
And one of the things I saw that was so cool about this episode, talking a little bit, I won't say too much, but in regards to the pigs and sort of leaving something...
Oh, wait a minute, I have to ask you a question. You saw the episode?
Yes.
When did you see it, today?
Yeah, okay, let me explain. Your management sent me a preview link.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry. Right. So, I mean, like I said, if you don't want to get into it, that's fine. We can talk about the other episodes.
No, I just want to understand because, technically the episode tonight is your last week's episode, and you've already seen next week's episode, so you're one ahead of us all. I just want to know where you're at. I've seen this episode, too, and I know what's going on. But if you want to talk about it, as long as we don't give away anything profound, go ahead. You're talking about the pigs. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Well, no, I mean, that was extremely interesting to me for the fact that it does not show, like, very few, and I'm doing air quotes, animals or whatever you call it, very basic type creatures, tend to leave something back like that. That was all I was saying, because I know obviously you talk about wood knocks and things like that, and I just thought that was really neat because I saw something I'd never saw before, and I've been kind of researching this, off and on, this type of stuff. Not so much cryptids, but more along the lines of ghostly phenomenon and spirits. But that was really cool. I love being taught stuff, because sometimes
well, you know what?
it happens like that.
When you say scripted, the show is what I would call semi-scripted. I mean, we go into it with, a relative game plan, but things can change and often do, as we're shooting. And in fact, there's an episode that's coming up towards the end of the season that is absolutely one of my favorites. And we went into it with a person identified as a primary suspect, and in the middle of the investigation, based on interviews that I had with one of the guests, I changed my mind, and I said, you know what, I understand, why, the researchers like this person, but based on the new information, I like this guy better. And they went with it, and we went with it. So, this is, again, goes back to what we talked about earlier. You follow the evidence where it leads you. And again, we did have a basic idea of what we thought was going to happen, and it ended up going in a different direction based on what we found. And I love that. And, if it necessitates a change, you do it, period.
Right. Well, I mean, and that's where it comes down to, are you following the scientific method, as we've mentioned before? Are you trying to prove your case? And it does say that,
there's nothing wrong with going into an investigation with a hypothesis or a theory, but again, the evidence is what's driving it, because you have to have some type of a template to look for the evidence in the first place. But if you just go looking for evidence to fit a conclusion you've already reached, that's called a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's not science.
Right. Well, it's like, what was the old thing of saying, you just bought a yellow beetle or something, and then you suddenly notice all these, what I'm saying? It's like you are willing and willfully looking for that type of activity, and then you're going to go, well, see, there it is, and that's, again, right. That's what I love about the show, man. And, because, we've been following it for, several seasons now. And,
yeah.
Is there something that you want to do that maybe you haven't got to do?
Oh, yeah.
Lay something on.
Yeah.
What's something if you can share?
To be quite honest with you, I mean, my research has to do with, the medieval Templars coming to America, interacting with the indigenous people here, and really setting the table with things like the Kensington Runestone to eventually found this country. And I think this is arguably the most important story. We have new documents, new information, numerous sites to visit. I mean, I can't even tell you how excited I am to do that. And I think if, knock wood, if we do get another season, we'll have a chance to pursue those. But that's really where my passion is. And there is a Templar episode that people, I think, are really going to enjoy at the end of this season with a brand new discovery that surprised even me. So stay tuned for that. But really, that is fertile ground for sure. There is a lot of Templars in America content that we really have only scratched the surface to.
Well, and it's so funny because how do I say it? I try to say things in a polite way and not step on toes.
No, that's okay.
Well, I just mean it's not against you, it's against what I'm getting ready to say. You can have people as dogmatic, narrow-minded, and protective of their babies as in a scientific surrounding as you could any sort of religious setting or whatever. People don't like change, and because all the books say this or all the, I went and studied this and that. This is my I got my doctorate in early American, prehistory or whatever. Well, wait a minute, were you telling me that's wrong? And then people get egos come into play.
Well, of course, and this is what drives me crazy about this. And I think people sometimes they try to accuse me of the same thing, and believe me, I may seem like I am protective of evidence and work that I've done that I feel is grounded in science. It's been peer reviewed and is solid work. But I don't know if people understand. For 35 years, I've done forensic investigations using proper scientific method in the professional world. I've testified in numerous court cases, and I haven't lost yet. And it's not because I'm so wonderful. It's because I will never venture away from the facts. And if I have a client that has a loser case, I look at them and say, look, you better settle, because I'm not going to lie for you. And the facts aren't on your side this time. So if you're smart, you're going to figure out some type of a settlement. But I know this world, I think, better than people think sometimes. And, they see me on TV and they think I'm an actor. Well, for gosh sakes, if you watch a few episodes, you know I'm not an actor. I am just playing me, really, and, trying to do the best job we can. But the one thing I will never do is ever lie to the audience. We will never plant things. We will try to entertain people, but I will never lie to the audience. And I will tell you, there are a lot of shows out there that can't say that.
Right. Well, I mean, like you said, how many episodes of a different type, whatever show, and you see these people, they pull up into the car, and the guy walks up and go, hey, how you doing? And they shake hands. Who's filming it? Obviously, there's a cameraman set up there already.
Right.
And there's a sound man 10 feet back with a big, boom with the fuzzy wind thing on it, the sock.
Yep.
And people have to kind of get past that. Like you said, you have to look at the meat of it, and you have to look at the science behind it. And like I said, I think that shows. I think it shows the difference between your show and some other shows. And I'm not going to bash any other shows because, again, it's entertainment, and I have no dog in the race. But
at the end of the day, let's be honest here. Television is a business, right? And it's about making money for the networks and the production companies and all of that. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, profit's not a dirty word. There's nothing wrong with that at all.
Oh yeah, I'm a capitalist. I'm behind it.
Still, put together a successful show that makes money, and you don't have to, do things that are dishonest to your audience. And quite frankly, I think if you do it right, they can tell. And I've always been a believer that if you do what you're supposed to do, treat people the way that you want to be treated, work your fanny off, and try to do the right thing. And as far as the television show goes, money, success, and attention, and all that will take care of itself. You know what I mean?
Right. And then that's the thing. It's you have that thing of. And I'm as guilty as anybody. I want my show to be successful. I want whatever videos I do on YouTube, House of Asher stuff, whatever, plug. I want it to be welcomed, somewhat positively. Nobody, everybody wants to be accepted. That's humanity.
We all want approval, and we want people to like us, and we want them to like what we're doing. That's just normal. That's natural. So there's nothing to apologize there, man.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you too. We were talking a little bit about like the Phoenicians in America. Of the different shows, especially that we'll just stick with the series thus far. What episode specifically of the ones that have aired either surprised you, or maybe it kind of let you down? Maybe you were hoping something was going one way or the other and it wasn't. What are things that you took away that maybe you're like, oh, well, maybe there's a whole other element to this story that I thought before, but now it's even a larger story?
Well, that's easy. The alien artifacts episode, my gosh. And you've seen that one, right?
Yes, sir.
Well, the jack detectors, the guys that took us in the jungle and showed us where they found these artifacts that turned out to clearly be fakes, right? Mm-hmm. I will say this, right now. I don't believe those guys were involved in any type of fraud. I think that if there was somebody intentionally trying to deceive they found somebody else's practical joke, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
They were good guys, and they just wanted answers. And when I told them they were fake, and I told them not just that they were fake, I told them why they were fake. And they accepted it. They said, hey, look, we just want the truth. You gave it to us. Thank you. That was a little bit of a buzzkill from the standpoint. It would have been cool to have them be real, right? So you kind of go through this episode, and we went through the investigation thinking, well, this probably isn't going to be anything. These artifacts are modern, obviously, and, off we go.
Right.
And then at the end, when I got those test results back, and even though Mark had already gotten those ridiculous numbers that were so old, I just, it didn't really sink in until we got the second round of testing the same artifact, replicating the results, which is, by the way, scientific method. When we got those results, I was blown away. I still am. And, I think what we need to do is we need to figure out if that adhesive that we tested can be falsified, or if it can be reproduced using modern materials. I have a couple of ideas that we can investigate. That episode begs for a follow-up. So if there was one that surprised me, that's of the ones that have aired, that's the one that surprised me the most.
Right. Well, and there again, as far as I knew, those men were just regular guys. They weren't anthropologists. They weren't archaeologists. They were no sort of ologist at all. And, all they did, like you said, is just brought this forward and said, hey, this is something, we come across or someone come across. Is this a thing? And I remember you were talking about, it says, well, you're going to have weathering. If you're going to have a real clean cut, that's a real telltale sign that something's just not kosher. And,
well, in those artifacts, you could see that there was, a lack of weathering in some of them, and, they said they found these in one spot, and, the the sediment at the bottom of the grooves was completely different mineralogy, color, and type. It just, no way, So, anyway, I say it all the time, the results are the results, the data is the data. It is what it is, and sometimes it goes your way, sometimes it doesn't. That's life, man.
Right, but but also, it's a heck of a story. It's what I'm saying, and that's something that people can go along with you, because that's what people don't get, especially people that maybe don't do, be it paranormal investigation or whatever. It's just like, all right, a cop show. You see guys, sliding across the hood, Starsky and Hutch and stuff. Half the time it's paperwork. Half the time it's a stakeout. Half the time it's dead ends.
Right.
And that's why it's so frustrating for some people. That's why a lot of people get burnt out. And I think sometimes, not to kind of get back to different shows and stuff, I think sometimes it's like, look, we got to have some results. Are we going to kind of, salt this a little bit and do whatever? And that's what happens sometimes. I think sometimes people, if they don't have your background and maybe, I don't want to say this, it sounds like I'm kissing your butt, but your integrity, it's easy.
You can kiss me all you want. I love it. Thank you.
Okay then.
But kid, no, I appreciate that, and if that's the way we come across, that's probably more important than anything. Is integrity, and I have to be able to look myself in the mirror when I get done with all this. And I have to face my colleagues. I mean, I still work my job. I've never left my job. And, I need to go back into work, and I don't want them looking at me and saying, really?
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. And, like I'd mentioned, and I'm not trying to say, hey, come to Kentucky, but hey, come to Kentucky sometime. There's tons of stuff that I can show you.
Oh, my God, I know it.
You know what I mean?
I know there's a million things. We've been down there. We were down there in one of the first or second season. I don't recall off the top of my head, but there's amazing stuff. Look, every state has amazing mysteries.
Totally.
I mean, if we are lucky enough to get renewed again, there are a bunch of things that we can look into, and the Templars are just one of them. There's all kinds of other things that. Right. In every state. I mean, there's just all kinds of mysteries out there.
Well, there was a thing, and I'll just get into this, and then we'll get back more to the shows, and I apologize.
Fine.
There was, I don't know if you've ever been to Adair County. There had been a cave where they'd found like some 12-foot tall skeletons that had some sort of primitive shields and I think spears, and they were laid out very ceremonially. That's not a word, but it is now, in a very ceremonial, very ceremonial type of thing, and it was kind of in behind, I think, kind of a clayed up wall, sort of like you might find in a mound, like Mississippian Calhoun type Native American cultures, but it was just really kind of weird because it was down in a wash, and because I'm actually working on a book about all the counties in Kentucky, and I keep finding different quirky things like that, and that's why I'm so glad to have actually got to talk to you like this, because I'm going, I have to let this guy know, which I mean you probably already knew anyway, but it's just so cool because, like you said, some of the stuff you talked about, I grew up hearing about some things, and the way you handle it is very professional, and that's the best way I can say about it. But now, like you were talking about, let's talk a little bit more about like the Phoenicians. For the folks that maybe are not as versed in this as you, can you give kind of a Reader's Digest version of what are the Phoenicians, when they were, and how they came to America, you feel?
Well, the Phoenicians were basically a sailing culture in the coast of, what is now in the Middle East, on the far eastern coast of the Mediterranean, just north of Israel, in what is now Lebanon. And Tyre was their capital, and because they didn't have a lot of land, they couldn't really grow a lot of crops. They didn't have huge forests, although they did have some forests, and that's where a lot of the wood came from that was used to build the Temple of Solomon back at the time of the first temple. But the Phoenician cultures goes back at least 3,000 years and farther. And they were the ones that were hired out by a lot of other cultures, like the Egyptians, for just one example. And so they were really in you could say, the shipping business. And they sailed all over trafficking goods, and that's how they made their money for their society. But the thing is that back in the Bronze Age times, and we're talking going back even, I don't know if we would have called them Phoenicians at this time. They probably had a different name. But when you go back 5, 6, 7, 8,000 years ago, I mean, there were people that were coming to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan area, and they were mining copper, and they were collecting copper. And what I mean by that is, after the glaciers melted away about 10 to 12,000 years ago, probably 10 or 11,000 years ago up there in northern Michigan, there was copper literally laying on the ground, float copper, just laying all over. And you could just literally go and just pick it up. And the thing about Michigan copper is it's 99.9% pure. So it would have been highly prized. In fact, back in those days, it was because of its antibacterial properties and the fact that they used it to make bronze, it was even more valuable than gold and silver. So it was highly prized. And to have a deposit like that with such pure gold that didn't need processing, that you could literally pick up off the ground. How they found out about it, I don't know, but good news does make its way to people, and they had the sailing ability to get there. And then, they would go in around Africa. Well, they would go around Africa to the east, but they would just go out the Mediterranean, north by the British Isles. Then they would either take the northern route, or maybe they went across by the Lesser Antilles and then up the North American coast. They probably went both ways, and then into the St. Lawrence and the Great Lakes. And you have to remember, you start going back thousands of years ago, water levels were a lot different. The crust of the earth actually was pressed down because of the weight of the glacial ice. Even though it had melted back, it was in the process of rebounding. So there were a lot more open waterways where they could just sail directly into the Great Lakes. So, you have to think about it going back to that time frame. And then when they came back, they would go by England and they would mine tin, which, is the other metal you need for bronze. And, I mean, it was, they would have made just money hand over fist. And So they were a sailing culture. You're going to see a Phoenician boat tonight, and we're going to talk about its sailing abilities and navigating abilities on the open oceans. And I have no doubt that they were there, and they took out a lot of copper.
You know, something I was thinking about too, because like you were mentioning the ship, and it was extremely impressive. Where do you stand, or do you even entertain? You hear different people talk about, it doesn't matter who it is. It could be Edgar Cayce, or it could be different, Plato and Socrates. Different people wrote about earlier cultures. Like, it doesn't have to be Atlantis. I'm not trying to say is Atlantis real, but there's.
Why not? I mean, I'll tell you exactly how I feel about that. And Atlanteans is as good a term as any. I mean, I don't, until we get some type of documentation that they had a formal name, either they called themselves or some other culture called them. You go back 10 to 12,000 years ago to places like Göbekli Tepe that was covered up 12,500 years ago. I mean, we're talking about an advanced culture that had observatories. And when you start looking at things like the Great Pyramids that are found not just in Egypt but all around the world, places like Cahokia, Stonehenge, America's Stonehenge, we're finding out now that these sites are much older than first thought, going back 10, 12, who knows how many thousands of years ago. Right. And the question is, and we're really just now unlocking the secrets of these megalithic structures. And they're immensely complicated. They incorporate complex geometry, astronomy, geometry, trigonometry in some cases. A highly advanced culture created them, but we don't know who they are. Now, this idea of the Atlanteans, to me, makes a lot of sense. In other words, that there was a high culture that existed prior to the flood. That we find in cultures all around the world. They talk about the same catastrophic event at about the same time, roughly 10 to 12,000 years ago, which coincides geologically with the rapid melting of the continental ice sheets and the raising of sea level 300 to 400 feet. Now, that may not seem like a lot to people, but when you're living on the coastlines and you raise sea level 300 to 400 feet, most ancient cultures were living on the coastlines because that's where all the food was.
Right. And
if they were all displaced at the same time, doesn't it make sense that those stories about this catastrophic event would be passed down globally?
I mean, it would make sense. Even if you look at, even when there's times when we didn't have to deal with the weight of ice sheets, I know just from stories in school about like the Mississippi, strong earthquakes will do different things and reroute rivers and make change the courses, and then of course places that once lived on the area that had water and whatnot. It's almost like once the interstates come through small towns, a lot of times they died off, but just because, like you said, there was no food, aka money, or people coming in for visiting and whatnot, and stuff like that. So why wouldn't it be the same then? I mean, obviously, if something happened,
of course it would be the same then. Look, human beings, regardless of what race they are, what culture they are, I mean, we all have the same basic makeup, right? We love our families. We want to provide for our families. We need to survive. We need shelter. We need clothing. We need food. And, we're all asking the same questions, where did we come from? Where do we go after we die? These are universal truths that every human being on this planet experiences. And there's no reason to think that anything that happens today with humans didn't happen 10, 12, 20, 30, 50, 100,000 years ago, a million years ago. I mean, we have a word in geology. It's called uniformitarianism. And basically, the definition is that the geological processes that are affecting the world today are the same as they were millions of years ago. Wind, water, ice, volcanism, whatever. Those processes that we see shaping the geological world today have been going on for millennia. And I got to believe that the same is true with human beings There might be some slight differences, but those basic fundamental things I don't think ever change.
No, I mean, I would have to say you're right. And, and that's the funny thing is that, I don't know, the thing that I've always noticed that even when I was a kid, everybody kind of feels like we are at the pinnacle of humanity. We've got it on lock. And then when you sometimes also bring in other cultures, earlier cultures, anything from stuff like the Baghdad battery to the different, there was a navigational item. I'm blanking on the name, and it had all these different cogs, and it was for following the stars. It was more or less to help.
Oh, it was like an astrolabe.
That's it. That's what it was. But it was very, very old.
It was complex, and it was very old, right?
Right.
Well, what you're saying is exactly what I believe. And, I mean, I think, like you said, a lot of people think that we as a species have reached the pinnacle of our knowledge and somehow we're as good as we're ever going to be. And I completely disagree with that. I think in some ways we are regressing as a species. I mean, look what we're doing to our planet. And I don't want to get into politics, but all I can tell you is, you can debate global warming, climate change, all that you want, but at the end of the day, why would you even take a risk if there's any chance that we are doing something negative to our home? I mean, we live here, right? Why would you even gamble with it? It just boggles my mind. And the fact that we have done so much damage, are we really that advanced? Really?
Right. Well, I mean, there's a word that was tossed around, a lot, hubris, and it's a very powerful word. It's almost a buzzword now. And hubris, yeah. We're just, people are so friggin' bold that feel, oh well, this happened to them, but we got this on lock. And it seems like it's over and over. It seems like you stack up this many rocks, you get really bold. You put one too many rocks and knock it down. You have to start up again. And I would like to think, I grew up a lot on like Star Trek and things like that, and I really hope that one day maybe we can reach that point to where we're not going to be back, shaping flint, and I'm saying trying to hunt down stuff barefooted, and I'd kind of like to think we could get further than that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Star Trek, that you were a big fan of Star Trek growing up, and I was too, and I still am. And I'm talking about the original version, Captain Kirk and Spock and McCoy and Scotty and all the rest of them. I mean, there was something magical about that show. There seemed to be almost a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek bit of fun, and I think it was Kirk. Always had that sort of impish smirk on his face, but yet there's some really powerful, big messages in many of the stories that you see in the original show. The first interracial kiss that was ever seen on television was between Uhura and Kirk. And, one of my favorite episodes was, and this was done during the 60s, right? A time of racial unrest and all the protests and it was an awful time, right? And the assassinations. But there was an episode, and it starred Frank Gorshin as one of these guys who was black on one half of his body and white on the other. And this other race that lived on this planet with the black whites was the white blacks, the guys that were white on the one side and black on the other. And they hated each other because they were different colors.
Right.
And they looked one race looked down on the other, and to the point where they were trying to kill each other, and it just underscored how ridiculous. Right.
How asinine
this racism is. I mean, It's really the same thing: a black-white versus a white-black. Right. I mean, he had the makeup literally from the top of his head down through the middle of his nose, through his face, neck, all the way through his body. The right leg was one color, the left leg was the other.
Right.
And the fact that they showed racism for just being the opposite colors, it was ridiculous on one hand, but poignant with the times, right? And it really, I thought, did a beautiful job of sort of bringing to light how silly it is to look down on somebody just because their color is different. Right.
Well,
it's almost as bad as like when somebody gets a real bad sunburn. Does that make them like a different? I mean, it's almost like that, right?
Right. Well, I mean, and what's the thing that hits me, which obviously I got to say a shout out for Frank. Obviously he went on to be like the Riddler. He was really influential.
He was a great actor. Do you remember that episode?
Yes, I do. And that was the thing, is that what I remember was watching that stuff. Obviously in rerun, I'm 49, so I missed some of the live stuff. But even then, you could kind of look at it and see. But the thing was, in all the different documentaries and things that I'd read about, Roddenberry, is that, they were taking real chances. I mean, they were talking about people saying, hey, which I hate this because I am a Southerner, but I'm not an idiot. There were like people in Mississippi and people wanting to pull their sponsorship because they were talking about like you mentioned that one, and also like the first interracial kiss and all this. And it was just like, what freaking century are you guys in? Yeah. And it was, people can look back at it kind of now, which don't get me wrong, obviously we still have problems and wherever, north, south, east, and west. Sure.
In many ways, it's just as bad as then, if not worse. And I mean, let's be honest. It's not a good place to be. We're better than that. And one thing you may not know about Gene Roddenberry, he was a Freemason, and he was a Scottish Rite Mason, and he was a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Mason. Mm-hmm. And you don't get to be a 33rd unless you're doing some really, really good work for humanity. And, I'm not the least bit surprised when I watch those episodes. I'm a 32nd degree, but I know a lot of 33rds, and I know what kind of, people they are. And it just goes to show you that there was a lot of thought that went into those episodes, but it was veiled. It was allegorical in many cases. And, you have to be paying attention to catch some of the things that were going on. That was part of the brilliance of that show. And call me biased because I am a Freemason, but I think those are important lessons that we can still learn from today.
Right. Well, it's funny because I was going to ask, because there's a lot of stuff that you touch on about the Templars and stuff, and since we're talking about it, my brother, my cousins in the Scottish Rite, and I was going to ask you how old your grandma was, but
how old my grandmother is?
Yeah. Okay. Well, that was just sort of a pass. Especially maybe it was a Southern thing, and so they go, well, how?
Yeah, that one went over my head. I'm sorry.
Okay, well, I don't think I'm letting.
It sounds interesting. Enlighten me.
Okay, well, it was sort of more or less of a thing, and I don't think I'm gonna have anybody come get me tonight. But like I said, but it was just more or less a thing of going, where's your temple? And they'll go, so how's your grandmother? And she says, 138 Liberty Lodge. Okay.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. That's probably just some old Southern stuff.
That's just a coded way of asking a question. We do that all the time. I mean, another one is when you're with somebody and you say, "Hey, so have you traveled to the East?" And that means are you a Mason? Right. And it's funny. I've asked that question a few times from people. And if a Mason will jump on it right away and he'll give you some type of response, but people that aren't will go, "Oh, you mean like to New York or to Boston or?"
Yeah, what?
And then they're not a Mason.
Right. Well, the big thing was, and I won't get too much into that in the last few minutes we got, but the term, ask someone, "Are you a fellow traveler?" That's kind of what I'll tell people. They ask. I mean, actually, I have it.
Traveling man.
Yeah, are you a traveling man? Right. And
yep.
What's so funny is that because there was the Masons and there was also the Odd Fellows, which my dad was actually an Odd Fellow. So there's a lot of that. I mean, especially here, if you come, looking anywhere, you look at architecture, you look at that type of thing. There's a lot of stuff connected with the Masons, and I hate it that some people really got a bad rap, and people take things that they don't understand. And because they don't understand it, they demonize it, and that's unfortunate.
Of course, and of course, the Roman Catholic Church has always been against Freemasonry because, I'll just be honest, and the church wants to basically tell people what to think, what to believe, and what to do in many cases. And in Freemasonry, it's up to you. And it's about learning and growing. And, I look, the dirty little secret, I'll just be honest with you. In organized religion of any kind, they basically encourage you to use a conduit to get to the Creator or to get to God. And you don't need a conduit. You can have a relationship with deity or God, whatever you want to call it,
right,
on your own. That's your own personal thing, and
right,
it's nobody else's business but your own. And I think the problem is people fall into that trap that they need to have an institution help them get there, and they don't need anyone else. You can do it all by yourself.
Right. It's that middleman thing, and it's a kind of control mechanism. And you told me a dirty little secret. I'll tell you mine. I'm kind of more or less a practicing agnostic. I feel if there is whatever God is, a force or whatever, it dwells within. And when you do positive things, you emanate that, and you help strengthen that force. Not to sound too Star Warsy, but
I love it. No. Listen to what you're saying. It's like when you do an act of kindness for somebody without expecting anything in return. I mean, that feeling you get by helping somebody and seeing them being grateful. There's no better gift. And the more people do that, the more that it comes around and it comes back to you. And even if it doesn't, it's just knowing in yourself that you did something that was good to help someone else. That's a great feeling.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what we're here to do, right? Help each other and try to learn, and if we can better, what's the old saying? Leave the place a little bit better than you found it. Well, let me ask you this, Scott.
Absolutely.
I'm getting ready to wind this down. I want you to get out of here because I know you got things to do. But where can people contact you if they want to maybe let you know about a situation? And what's something you just want to say in the last minute to the folks out there?
Well, first off, I just want to remind people, watch the show tonight. It's coming on in just a few minutes, 9 o'clock Central Time, 10 o'clock Eastern, America Unearthed, Episode 5, and it's on Travel Channel. So be sure you definitely do that. And then if people are interested, I will be posting a blog right after the show. I have a blog site called scottwolteranswers.blogspot.com. Just type in Scott Wolter blog and it'll come up. And I will post some photos. I've done that for every episode of the show. I think people get a kick out of it, some behind-the-scenes stuff. And if you have a comment, put it down there. I'll respond and be happy to do that. I also have a website where people can look at my books. I have a brand new book that I'm going to have in my hands here within a week or two called Cryptic Code of the Templars in America, Origins of the Hooked X. I've got a bunch of other books. Go to www.hookedx.com, HOOKEDX.com, and anybody who buys books off my website, I will sign them. I sign them all. So,
that's a good deal.
And then at the end of the episode, you will see a website where you can write in if you have a tip that you think I should take a look at. Go ahead and use that website and send pictures and the story, and we'll definitely take a look at it. And if we get another season, we just might knock on your door. You never know.
There we go. Well, Scott, man, thank you so much. I'll cut you loose. The best to you and your family. Have a great night, and I am looking forward to the new episodes.
All right. Thanks again for having me. I've had a great time. Let's do it again.
Amen. You have a safe night, sir.
All right. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.
And there he was, the man, the legend.
Go for you.
That's great. I'm doing an outro. Just 1 second.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. As I was saying, that was Mr. Scott Wolter, America Unearthed Travel Channel. Tune in, check it out. You'll laugh, you'll cry, it'll become a part of you. But until next time, enjoy the sunlight, enjoy all that's out there, but as the shadows grow long, look under your bed, look in your closet. You never know, there might be something strange out there. But, sometimes there's learning in fear, So take the positive from it and make it a life lesson. So until next time, goodbye, everybody.